Oops. I'll give you a brief description of her accomplishments in graduate training. Sorry, I'm again losing connectivity here as usual. Okay, so Melanie currently serves as the Interim Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs. She's also the Director of the Career Development Center and the Executive Director of the Women's Leadership Center at the University of St. Joseph in West Hartford, Connecticut, where it's a balmy 50 degrees next week. She works with university undergraduate and graduate students to help them achieve their career goals. Prior to joining the University of St. Joseph, she served as Director of Education at the Jackson Lab for Genomic Medicine in Connecticut, where she developed programs for undergraduates, graduate students, and postdocs, as well as assisting scientists with career transitions. Melanie is the author of the book we're projecting the cover of right now, Next Gen PhD, A Guide to Career Paths in Science, published by Harvard University Press in August 2016. We have purchased copies of the book and shared it with all the colleges. If you have a chance to look at it, please do. It's also available on Amazon, just a little plug. It's a great resource to have, whether you're thinking about it, whether you're advising students, whether you're a student looking at this, please do look into this book. So while working on this book, she served as a senior research associate in the Labor and Work-Life program at the Harvard Law School, where she conducted survey research on careers for PhDs in science. She also served as the founding director of the FAS Office of Postdoctoral Affairs at Harvard University, held the same position at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and served as a consultant to the NIH in building the first NIH Career Center for over 9,000 intramural trainees. Melanie received her bachelor's degree from Colgate University and graduate degrees from the University of Michigan and North Carolina State University. She is also a nationally certified counselor with a career development focus on PhDs in science. So with that, welcome, Melanie.
Thank you so much, and a huge thank you to John and Dr. Matur for having me today. And thank you, all of you participants who are able to join us. I know that this was rescheduled due to the snowmageddon, the frigid temperatures that you were experiencing, and that some of the traumatic effects of that. So thank you for hanging in there, and I'm glad that you all made it through, and thank you for joining us today. So as Dr. Matur mentioned, I have been working on looking at PhD careers for many decades. I've been a career counselor for just about 20 years, and most of that time I've spent with PhDs in science. And so I'm really pleased to share my work with you today, and I will start by sharing my screen. I can do that. Let's see. Just taking a minute. Can you all see that slide?
Yes, it looks like
Yes,
you're good.
Melanie, we can.
Yes, I can see it.
Thanks. So what I wanted to talk about today is you and your next steps. So, welcome to all of the graduate students, trainees, postdocs, and any faculty, special guests that are with us today. You're welcome to share any of this information with your trainees, but just wanted to share with you a little bit of a background. When I was at Harvard, I was working with postdocs and found that many of the postdocs were asking similar questions about, oh, I'm not quite sure what to do next, or I feel that I understand the PI role and I'm not sure that that's a good fit for me personally, or I'm really excited about the PI role, but the academic job market is really difficult right now. So where are PhDs ending up? And we have wonderful data sets through the National Science Foundation. There are our most robust data sets in terms of where PhDs end up, but the PhDs I was working with were asking other questions, and they were indicating some ideas and misconceptions that I thought I would take you through today. One of those is that all PhDs want to work as faculty members. So I think that's a misconception. Some faculty have shared this with me, although others are recognize the broad range of opportunities for PhDs. But this was one misconception I was hearing from faculty and trainees. Another is that the only jobs out there for PhDs are faculty jobs. Also untrue, the world of work is very large. And then finally, there are no faculty jobs. So this is not true. There are still PhDs and postdocs who are being hired into faculty roles, tenure track faculty jobs. So I think that's a misconception we need to address. PhDs have no employable skills. I heard this sentiment frequently from the trainees that I worked with in individual career counseling appointments. And so wanted to debunk that misconception, but had no hard data. PhDs are not using their research skills in non-faculty jobs. So this was a fear of many of the trainees I worked with. And then finally, PhDs outside of the tenure track are not happy in their work. So to replace those misconceptions, I would assert that most PhDs are unsure of what jobs exist for them. So PhDs, especially those who have gone straight through undergraduate training, graduate school, and into postdoctoral positions, have seen and have been exposed to jobs in the academy, and in particular, the faculty role. So they know that role, but they may not be aware of all of the other options available to them. PhDs have many employable skills. I would assert that, just having known PhDs over time, but did not have any hard data to back that up. PhDs use their research skills in most jobs, and PhDs in science are happy in their work. So to work on these assertions, I developed a research project that I then took to a labor economist, Richard Freeman, who works in the labor and work-life program at Harvard. And talked to Richard about some of these assertions. And I told him, I think there's a research project here that we can embark on together. And that's when he invited me to join his group. So our research questions then for the research project that I put together are, what skills, if any, are developed organically during graduate and postdoctoral training? And are these the same skills that are required for success in different occupations? So I wanted to collect that data so I could actually share it with the population in the US and abroad to say, yes, there are skills that are valued by employers that PhDs and postdocs are developing. Where are science PhDs currently employed? So the PhDs I was working with wanted more granular data to understand the types of positions and occupations that PhDs were filling. What are the primary activities in which PhDs are engaged at work, so I could prove that they're engaged in research, even outside of the tenure track role? And are PhDs in science satisfied? So bolstered by these research questions, then I embarked on a survey research project. Here's my methodology. I wanted to share it with you just to give you the frame. So the sample that I was looking at were those PhDs who had graduated in the past or in the preceding 10 years. So I embarked on this research project in 2015. So we were looking at all of those people who graduated with a PhD in science between 2004 and 2014. And we looked at all branches of science. So we looked at doctorates earned in the physical, life, computational, engineering, and social sciences. And then we looked at people who had trained, worked, or studied in the US. So we thought we would capture those people who earned a doctoral degree outside of the US and then came to the US for additional training in science. We leaned very heavily on social media for outreach to let people know about the survey. And so we posted it broadly in different social media outlets, but we also posted articles in Science and Nature just to let people know that we were collecting this data. The survey was open for a month in 2015 in the spring. And those are the 4 areas that we focused on for the survey construction and the survey items: demographics, education, postdoctoral training. And then finally, understanding where people are employed. So with that survey launch, we actually received just over 11,000 responses from PhDs in science. And of those 11,000, just over 8,000 were usable responses. And when I say usable, those that fell outside of our sample, they tended to fall outside of our graduation date range. And so their PhD had to have been conferred between those 10 years. And I was encouraged by some of the comments and letters and emails that I received from PhDs who earned their degrees outside of that date range, who are saying, I'm really excited about this study because I am a PhD who's working outside of the tenure track role, and I'm really happy in my job. So it encouraged me to keep going. In terms of the demographics of the sample then, so just over 8,000 people, most of the survey respondents were women. And if any of you have ever worked in survey research, you will know women are much more likely to complete surveys. So I was not surprised by that outcome. In this second bar graph, I wanted to share that 82% were US citizens or permanent residents, 17% were international trainees. That number is quite low. At this point, we know that in the US, approximately 60%, maybe a little bit higher, of all of our postdoctoral trainees are international scholars. So why is that number low? Well, I leaned so heavily on social media, it may be that at the time in 2015, this is 6 years ago now, there may not have been as many people using those platforms as there are now. But this third statistic I wanted to share with you, I'm very pleased with, and that is 10% of the people in the sample are actually from groups that are underrepresented in science. And that number very closely reflects the number in the NSF data from the same time period. So from 2004 to 2014, of those people who earned PhDs during that time, 12% were from underrepresented groups in science. So I'm really pleased with that. I think that is a result of reaching out to several affinity groups, to the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science and similar groups, the National Society of Black Engineers, and so on and so forth. And then finally, the last set of bar graphs is about marriage. So we have 70% of people in the sample are married, 26% of people in the sample are single, and 2% of the people in the sample are divorced. Now, if you know anything about the divorce statistics in the US, that current percentage is actually around 50%. So around 50% of people in the US have been divorced. So why is it so low in our sample? And does that suggest that scientists tend to stay married? It doesn't. It's just demographically, this is a very young sample. And so again, these are people who are just received their PhDs or were perhaps going through a postdoc or had just started working in a new job. So I think that's why the number is so low. And then about 1 in 3 have kids. So wanted to give you the picture of the sample of people that we're looking at. Now, in terms of discipline, most of the respondents to the survey were in the life sciences. I think that is a result of my natural network and my contacts, who are largely in medical schools, PhDs, working in the basic life sciences, across the country, and those colleagues that I've connected with over time. But the physical sciences were next, followed by the social sciences and engineering. If you look at this breakdown, though, it again fairly closely mirrors the breakdown of disciplines according to the NSF data sets, but for engineering. So my number of engineers is quite low. But again, I think that's just a matter of my natural network at the time. But so as you can see from this graph, And knowing that we're looking at people who had graduated within the past 10 years with their PhD, some people in the sample were currently in a postdoc. So it was about 45% of the sample were currently employed in a postdoc. And then the other set of 55% of people in the sample are currently working. Whether they completed a postdoc or not, they're working outside of a postdoctoral role. And so it's largely those people who are working in full-time permanent jobs that we want to explore today. Before we do that though, I wanted to share, I asked about career goals at the start of the PhD and the postdoc. And this is a question that you might want to ask yourself. When you first embarked on your PhD program, what was your career goal? What were you thinking about? And so I thought we would look at 4 different large categories: a faculty position, a research position in industry, a research position in government, or a different type of job. So in terms of career goals at the start of the PhD, 87% of people in the sample indicated that they were looking for a faculty job. So maybe not surprising, but I just wanted to share that with you to give you that information. Now, what would you expect to see then if we look at people when we ask the same question at the start of the postdoc? So at the start of the postdoc, I was thinking that that number might drop a bit. The number interested in a research position in industry might have increased. This is the data that we saw from the sample. So still at the start of a postdoc, 82% were still interested in a faculty position, embarking on postdoctoral training, trying to move into a faculty job afterwards. But look at that jump in the people interested in positions in industry. So 59% versus 30% at the start of the PhD. And then 27% in government and 15% in other jobs. So we're starting to see some diversity in terms of career interests among the postdocs. If we look at postdocs across the board and look at the number of people who engaged in postdoctoral training, which is just over 4,700, 68% of the people in the sample engaged in one postdoctoral appointment. But look at this number, 27%, so greater than 1 in 4 were interested or completed 2 distinct postdocs. And by distinct, I actually use the definition of at a different institution. So this number has changed over time. We're seeing more people engage in multiple postdoc appointments. And then 4% completed 3 or more distinct postdocs. So I wanted to share that data with you. In terms of our research question about skills, I would like for you to think about what kinds of skills you think people develop organically through the very nature of scientific training. So through scientific training, we know that we all are gaining discipline-specific knowledge. So that skill we can count on. But what are some other skills that we are developing that are required for scientific inquiry? I wanted to share with you this list that I developed for the study. This list, including the ability to gather and interpret information, analyze data, manage a project, oral communication skills, written, and so on. This list was developed through looking at other studies, including the National Association of Colleges and Employers, so looking at skills that employers value, but also looking at the National Postdoctoral Association and their core competencies that they argue every postdoctoral trainee should emerge with. So taking into account the different studies that had been done, I developed this list of 15 skills that I think, and I would argue, you all have. So trainees at the PhD or postdoc level have developed in some capacity. So you may be stronger in some of these skill sets than others, but it is my assertion that you will develop some measure of these skills across your scientific training. What I asked in the survey project was, did you develop these skills in the course of your scientific training, and were those skills important for you in terms of success on the job once you eventually moved into your full-time permanent job? So I wanted to share with you the responses to those two questions on the next slide. So on the left-hand side, you can see the percentage of people who agreed and would argue that they acquired this skill during training are marked in blue. So 95% would argue that they gained discipline-specific knowledge, which is great. That's the key, the goal for our training at the doctoral level, ability to gather and interpret information and so on. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the percentage of people who argued that those skills are important for success on the job in their current role, regardless of their occupation. And look at that percentage of the first skill set. 80% argued that their discipline-specific knowledge is still important for success on the job. So don't think if you're studying a very narrow area of science that you will never be able to use your discipline-specific knowledge, that it won't be relevant for the particular occupation that you move into, because it absolutely, it may be directly relevant, it may be tangentially relevant, but your discipline-specific knowledge can come into play in your future career. And then I wanted to call your attention to some of the other skill sets. So if you look down on the right-hand side at oral and written communication skills, 93% of the respondents argued that oral communication skills are required for or important for success on the job, and 91% indicated that written communication skills are important for success on the job. So anytime you can present in lab meeting, anytime you can present a seminar for your department, all of those training opportunities matter, because you will be using those, again, those skills across occupations. So across many different occupations. And we'll look at the diversity of occupations in a moment. But I just wanted to stress this. One of my favorite skill sets that is ranked very highly for being important for success on the job is the ability to learn quickly. So 71% of the sample believe they acquired that skill during training, and 89% believe that's important for success on the job. If you can imagine, there is quite possibly not a single employer out in the workforce who is not interested in hiring someone who can learn quickly. And I think that is a skill that PhD trained scientists have in spades. I think it's such a valuable skill that most PhDs in science have developed over time, that is crucial for really any sector, any occupation. So congratulations on your skill development to this point. And we can definitely, and I will tell you, I saw these numbers increase in terms of percentage who believe they acquired the skill during training if they did go through a postdoc. So your skills will continue to develop over time, and your skills will continue to develop in new jobs. But I just wanted to share this set to say, absolutely, yes, you have skills that are valued by employers. So if we start to look at the world of work, now we're starting to turn to those people in the sample who are employed full-time. I thought we'd start by looking at the faculty role. So in the sample, 22% were employed in tenure-track faculty jobs. So if that number seems high, it is. I actually pulled some data from the NSF data sets for the same time period to let you know what percentage of people who are PhD trained scientists moved into tenure track faculty positions in the same date range. And the answer is 7%. So why is our number so high? Our number is so high, I think, because of one of the limitations of my study. And one of the limitations of my study is that it definitely included some social desirability bias. So that bias may be that people who are in faculty roles were maybe quick to complete the survey, possibly. But this number is quite high because now, now at this point in our history, we're seeing quite possibly one of the toughest academic job markets that we've seen in a long time. That said, there are, of course, still PhDs and postdocs who are finding faculty jobs. For you, if you are really attracted to this occupation and want to move into a faculty role, I would encourage you to do a few things. One, network as much as you can, as often as you can. Think about giving talks, think about contacting, if you're interested in a particular geographic area, contacting universities where you could offer to give a talk in your field. You've got to network, attend scientific society meetings. You can volunteer for for committees and scientific societies. Try to make those connections early and often. And the second strategy I would encourage you to use is take a look at the faculty who have been hired at the types of institutions that you would be interested in. So if you feel that you would like to look at a university like UT San Antonio, take a look at the faculty who have been hired most recently. Look at their CVs. What kinds of papers do they have? Where were they publishing? And what kinds of grants have they received? So you've got to understand the profile of faculty who were hired most recently if you want to be an attractive candidate for the field. So I would definitely say if you're interested in a smaller liberal arts or teaching focused college, same exercise. Look at the CVs of those faculty who were hired most recently and try to understand what kinds of projects have they engaged in terms of classroom teaching, how much classroom teaching have they had before they moved into their faculty role, and again, what kinds of awards have they received, what kinds of grants have they received, because that's the name of the game. You've got to be able to build a lab. You've got to be able to understand what it takes to move into those jobs. So those jobs are still being posted, those jobs are still being filled. You just need to know what it takes to be attractive. Now let's look at the other percentage here that I have on the slide, and that is that 13% of the people in the sample are in non-tenure track faculty jobs. So when I found this number, and these are contingent faculty, adjunct faculty, visiting faculty positions, visiting assistant professors, this group of people who are not on the tenure track, I thought this number was quite low. And so I pulled data from the American Association for University Professors in a study that they embarked on, taking a look at contingent faculty, what they call contingent faculty. And those are faculty who are not on the tenure track. Of every single faculty position in the US, what do you think the percentage is of those that are not on the tenure track? And the answer is 68%. So why is that? Because largely, contingent faculty are less expensive than tenure track roles. My husband is actually a chair of a department at a local university here in Connecticut. And he is a full professor now, but he took on his tenure track role about 12 years ago. And at the time, I think there were 11 tenure track faculty in his department. And now there are 5. And so rather than renew those faculty tenure track lines, they largely have leaned on adjunct faculty for teaching their classes. And so it's a teaching focused college, but it's oftentimes a financial question. So just wanted to share that with you and share that I've worked with PhDs and postdocs who have been adjuncts at several different institutions, and it's hard. It's hard to piece together that kind of work, but it is an option. It is an option. So I just wanted to share that data with you. But look at the 22% again. If you think about that, the 22%, even if, you know, in our sample, it's somewhat high, there still remains 78% of people in the sample who are employed outside of the tenure track. So our next question is then, if they're employed outside of the tenure track, where are they? Where are they working? So let's take a look by sector first, and then we'll dig down into type of institution, and then we'll dig even deeper and look at type of occupation. So across sectors, 49% of the people in our sample are employed in education. 49%, so almost half of all of the PhDs who are employed are in education, and we'll look at what that means in a few slides. 12% are employed in biotech and pharma, 12% in government agencies, 6% in nonprofits, 4% in consulting, and so on and so forth. And then the numbers drop off quite a bit. And so if we dig deeper then and we look at where people are employed within education, 66% are employed in the research university, 23% at liberal arts colleges, 5% in community colleges, 4% K through 12, 1% in comprehensive regional universities, and 1% in medical schools. These are standalone medical schools. So the people who indicated research university, those were often campuses that included schools of medicine. So 66% are at research university campuses working full-time, maybe not in a tenure track role. So why is that? Why would someone choose, you know, if they had been an undergrad, graduate student, and a postdoc, why would they choose to stay at a research university? I've interviewed several people who have taken part in the survey, and they shared, largely it's because it's what they knew. It's an environment that they find really rich and rewarding and intellectually vibrant and engaging, and they wanted to stay in that environment for with which they were familiar. Also, people, you remember our demographic screen, lots of people had put down roots, maybe where they were doing their postdoctoral training, and many people started families. There were 1 in 3 people in the sample have kids. And so it may be that they grew to love the area that they were living in, you know, and some people may feel that way about San Antonio. So I think there are a lot of reasons for this, right? And then about 1 in 4 moved into liberal arts colleges. So this gives us some data, but what specific occupations did people move into in the education sector? So here are actual job titles that I took from the survey to give you a sample of the kinds of positions that are available at the university. You know, universities in many ways are like large cities. They have so many different types of departments and units and functions that you may serve as a scientist at a university, as a biostatistician. You may serve as an advisor to international students. You may serve as a tech transfer specialist. You may move into a decanal role and or work on clinical trials. So it all depends on what you personally are interested in. So what kind of work would you like to do all day long? When I started my career at UNC in Chapel Hill, I worked with a postdoc who was so intrigued by the work of the core facility that he worked in most often. And he got to know the director of the core facility and moved into a role there. And that's the kind of work that he loved. And that's where he spent his time and found a full-time job. And so it really depends on the kind of work that you enjoy most. And that's the question I would ask yourself first as you embark on this process. In terms of a real story, a real person who's working in the education sector, I wanted to share with you my friend Amy. Amy is in this sample. she earned her PhD in biomedical engineering at UVA and found that she loved mentoring and training the undergrads in her lab. And so she decided that she wanted to be in advising in some way at a university. And so she worked with the Career Center, the Center for Professional Development at UVA, and is now the Director of Professional Development at UVA. It's a full-time permanent job. And so she loves it, loves being on campus. That's where she likes to spend her time. She likes to advise. So that is an option. And I just wanted to share a few anecdotes with you of real people who have used their PhDs in different ways. So now if we move to the second most popular sector, and that is biotech and pharma, which was tied with government agencies, which we'll look at in a minute. 50% of the people in the sample in this sector work in biotech, 39% work in pharmaceuticals, and 11% work in med device and diagnostics. So in this sector, again, the types of occupations available go on and on and on and on. And I'm actually thinking about this as a next book project, and that is to break down the opportunities within biotech and pharma, because in drug development, for example, there are so many different types of roles that you could move into with a PhD in science. And so you might look at business development or product development, or being a team leader, working in regulatory affairs, working in R&D, working in marketing, being a medical science liaison. That is an appealing job to many PhDs once they understand more about that occupation. And you know, what I would encourage you to do in terms of learning about different occupations is to read, right? So to read more, to read through job descriptions. So if you see a job title like that, medical science liaison, and you're not sure what that means, read job descriptions. You'll understand the tasks, you'll understand the qualifications required. But then I would say secondarily, talk to people. Talk to people who are in that occupation now, because oftentimes people who are in an occupation are the best representatives, the best people to talk to about their field. So if you are an introvert and you find that kind of daunting, you can always start on email. So you can start by reaching out to someone, maybe on LinkedIn, who is a medical science liaison, and ask, you know, introduce yourself. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I'm interested in exploring different career options. I wonder if you might have time to talk about your role in this field. And when you're networking, and you can start electronically, you can start via email or via LinkedIn, you always want to express an interest in the other person's work. So rather than saying, I'm going on the job market, or I'm, you know, I expect to defend this spring and I'm looking for a job, you want to start out by saying, I'm really interested in your role, and I wonder if you might have time to talk on the phone for 20 or 30 minutes in the next few weeks about your job. And 99 times out of 100, most people will say, sure, absolutely, I'd be happy to. You know, where PhDs, the students and postdocs I've worked with, where they get frustrated is just when they don't hear back. But I don't think I've ever worked with anyone who has received a response like, I don't know who you are and I'm not interested in talking to you. Never do people respond like that. It's much more likely that they would just not respond. But many people do respond and are happy to talk. So that's still how I meet people. I still reach out to people on LinkedIn who are strangers. And I still will introduce myself, and then I'll ask about their work. And can we connect, because I'm really interested in the work that you're doing on XYZ. So I encourage you to do that kind of work. In terms of a real person who's in the biotech pharma sector, Manisha is a friend. She graduated from the University of Massachusetts Medical School, but she actually did her postdoctoral training at Harvard. So that's where I met her. She is now a principal scientist at Solid Biosciences, which I think is in Cambridge. It's Cambridge or Boston. But she found the job through networking. So attending workshops like this one, seminars, networking with people. Speaking of LinkedIn, I encourage all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn after today's session. So if there's ever anyone that you would like to be introduced to who's in my network, just let me know and I'd be happy to introduce you. Because my personal email is actually on my LinkedIn account. So I encourage you to do that. In terms of the government sector then, this is the other most popular sector. 87% of our respondents are in federal agencies, 8% work in state government, 3% military, and 2% local government. The trend that I saw in the data when I was looking at people who work in the government sector is that they were more likely to be working in their field of study directly. So look at these job titles now: astrophysicist, epidemiologist, chemist, watershed ecologist, and so on and so forth. This was more likely than in other sectors. Not impossible to work in other sectors, you know, in your field, but it was more likely that they were working in their specific field of science. Unless they wanted to do policy. Think about science policy, think about policy analysis, writing. Some wanted to do science communication. Those kinds of trainees would move into the government sector as well. So can be a trick with some visa restrictions depending on your background, but this is definitely an attractive sector for PhDs who are trained in science. I have a close friend who's in this field, actually, Kenny Gibbs. Kenny is now the chief for undergraduate and predoctoral training at NIGMS. And he went through the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows Program, which is not a requirement for entering policy. It is just one avenue that you can use. But think about that. There are specialty postdocs, training programs that you can go through if you're interested in a particular occupation. So there are also teaching focused postdocs. There are science communication postdocs. There are tech transfer postdocs. So be aware that if you're a PhD student, there might also be training opportunities where you could be training in different occupations. So I just wanted to share that with you. Kenny's very active in our field, so you may even know his name. He's written extensively about diversity and inclusion in the sciences, and he's a fabulous researcher and dynamic speaker if you ever get a chance to hear him. In terms of the nonprofit sector, this is the most diverse in terms of type of institutions. So we have research foundations, we have scientific societies, intergovernmental and NGOs, but we also have nonprofit research institutes like the Jackson Laboratory, where I worked. And so if any of you do mouse work, you probably know of JAX, of JAX mice. There are so many nonprofit research institutes in the US, though, that I would encourage you, if you're interested in doing your science in a nonprofit institute that is focused on a particular mission or curing a particular disease. There's a fabulous database of nonprofit research institutes on a website called AIRI, and that's AIRI.org. And that is the Association of Independent Research Institutes. And it is a list of all of the nonprofit research institutes in the US and what they study and their missions. So if you feel like you're a socially conscious, mission driven, and you want to work for an organization like a nonprofit that focuses on similar work, rather than a for-profit organization, definitely check out ARI.org, because you can read fairly quickly about what these different research institutes work on. In terms of in terms of the particular job titles within the nonprofit sector, again, great range, but you could work on policy, you could work on communications. Certainly in a place like Jack's, there are people who are geneticists, people who work in computational biology, people who work in their fields specifically. There's also museum education. There are directors of postdoc offices across the country who work in different nonprofits. And so like the Van Andel Institute, I'm actually good friends with the director of the postdoc office there. So really, really broad range of places where you could work and tasks that you could work on every day. So again, I would say, do your research. You know, once you've thought about what you might like, do your research and read job descriptions, read more about these kinds of jobs, and then find real people who are in the jobs now, because they're the best source of information on a particular job. Reluca Ellis is a PhD that I worked with. She actually switched disciplines for her postdoc. So she earned her PhD in chemistry at the University of Toronto, and she changed into atmospheric sciences when she went for her postdoc. She took courses on exhibit development. She volunteered at the Museum of Science in Boston. And we haven't talked about volunteering today, but volunteering is such a good way for you to explore a career field, because volunteers make their own hours. And so Reluca didn't have to work so much time away from the lab. She just worked on occasional Saturdays at the Museum of Science in Boston, and she helped to coordinate science festival activities. So she worked, you know, she volunteered when she could, but volunteer experiences are real experience that you can list on your CV. So that's the other tip that I would give you, is once you find any career field that is of interest to you, tailor your CV to that job. And that is something that you can do with volunteer opportunities. Doesn't have to be paid work. You don't have to leave the lab to develop experience. So Reluca also had another tip, and that was join listservs. So she joined a listserv of women who worked in atmospheric sciences across the globe, and saw a position come up at the Franklin Institute, which is the Science Museum in Philadelphia. And they were looking for the director of Climate and Urban Systems Partnership. Basically, they were looking for a PhD level scientist to come in and build an exhibit on climate change. And that was absolutely her dream job. And she would not have seen it because it wasn't posted widely, but she saw it because she was on a listserv. So also think about what you might like to do next, join listservs, and keep your eyes open for job postings. I still do that in my field. So in postdoc affairs and graduate student affairs, I still do that. So I wanted to share that with you. Before we leave, in terms of talking about the specific occupations in the study, I wanted to share some of my favorite job titles, because I want to impress upon you that the job market is changing every day, and there are job titles that you may not even have thought about, and there are job titles that may not exist yet. But it's so important for you to be networking and to be making connections, because you might find that there are some fabulous jobs out there. So this is my favorite list of job titles. And some of these make sense to me, like volcanologist. Of course, there are scientists who study volcanoes, and video game designer. You know, I have a 12-year-old son who would love that job. Coordinator of freshwater turtle and tortoise conservation. These are real job titles taken directly from the survey. Zoo nutritionist, of course that makes sense, because there has to be someone who focuses on the nutrition of the animals at the zoo. Aerospace physiologist. But then I got to nanofossil biostratigrapher, and I thought, I'm not quite sure what that is. So I started to do some work, and I actually met a woman who was friends with a nanofossil biostratigrapher. So I was able to ask, what does that person even do? And it's just as you might imagine, it is someone who studies the Earth's crust and different strata and identifies nanofossils in it. So makes sense, but just wanted to share with you, right now there are positions as virtual lab manager. There are different kinds of roles that have appeared in COVID times. So be reading, be out there, be networking if you can, to stay abreast of these different opportunities. In terms of primary activities at work, remember my argument was that yes, PhDs conduct research even if they're not in a tenure track role, and that was borne out in the data. So 40% of people engaged in full-time work conduct basic research at work, and 34% conduct applied research at work. So that's 74% taken together. So 3 in 4 PhDs are engaged in research in some way at work. And 1 in 3 PhDs or postdocs are engaged in teaching in some way at work. So I teach in my work, I present all the time. And I love it. I love teaching. I love working with the graduate students and undergrads who are here at USJ. So, so find those opportunities to do what you love. You can find them at UTSA, you can find them in jobs, and I'm happy to talk to you about your ideas. I wanted to give you a quick quiz. I asked a question about whether or not a PhD was required or preferred for people who are in non-faculty jobs. So of the sample of people who are in non-faculty jobs, 78% indicated that a PhD was required or preferred for their non-faculty job. So what does that tell us? That tells us that employers everywhere value the PhD. They value PhD training everywhere. This is across all sectors and all occupations. They recognize the PhD, they recognize the value of it and all that you have to bring to a job. When I asked the same question about a postdoc, was a postdoc required or preferred for a non-faculty job? 28% indicated that a postdoc was required or preferred for their current position. So what does that tell us? That tells us a couple things. One, a postdoc is required for some jobs outside of the tenure track, but it is not required for all jobs. And that is research that you can do if you are a current PhD and you need to make a decision about whether or not you're going to go into a postdoc. If you're a current postdoc and you feel like you're looking at positions that are not, requiring a postdoc or postdoc training, that's fine, because you better believe you have still built skills throughout the course of your postdoctoral training, skills that can be applied in different ways to your job.
Melanie, I just want to let you know we have 3 minutes left.
Okay, that's great because I have 1 slide left. So, oh no, two. So thanks for that. Thanks for reminding me. So to wrap up in terms of finding jobs that are right for you, we've talked about most of this, but networking is crucial and the #1 task that you should engage in, either electronically, virtually, or in person. Check out professional associations, join scientific societies and committees. Conduct informational interviews, meaning meet people who are in those jobs, volunteer, find multiple mentors, and give yourself enough time. So the last piece of information I wanted to share with you is, are PhDs happy in their jobs? So I thought it would be interesting for you if I broke down the PhDs by people employed in tenure track roles, in non-tenure track faculty roles, or employed outside of the faculty role. So who was the happiest? people who are not employed in a faculty job. So I'm just kidding, actually. Everyone was happy for the most part, except for people who are not on the tenure track. Or who, I should say, who are in non-tenure track faculty roles. But if you look at those bottom numbers, 80% of PhDs in the study indicated that they're satisfied or very satisfied in their jobs. So it's a really good news story that people are really happy in their jobs, regardless of what they found. So if you have more questions, if you're not sure where to start, or if you're engaged in a job search and need some sample interviewing questions or sample email language to network, anything like that, you can check out Next Gen PhD. And thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that you came.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Really great talk. I think you've given us lots to talk about, lots to discuss and follow up on. So some of the people that you mentioned, actually, we are inviting to give talks about those particular job opportunities as well, and how they got to their careers, the pathways, all of that. So this has been very useful, and I do urge everybody to connect on LinkedIn with not just Dr. Sinche, but me as well, and people in the graduate school. So we have professional development activities in all of these areas that are being provided as well, that are coming up. So please stay tuned and do attend those sessions as well. So I know we don't have questions yet, but I see a lot of thank yous, a lot of real appreciation for everything you've done. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And if anyone does have a question, I'm really happy to continue this conversation after today. So like I said, my personal email is in my LinkedIn profile. So please reach out when you can.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And hopefully it will warm up soon in Connecticut. Otherwise, welcome to join us here in Texas. And thank you, everybody, for attending. This was really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you.